So we have reached the end, the last chapter of Ingold, chapter 23, the poetics of tool use, and the last chapter and conclusion of Rosa, criminalized intertextualities. They seem to come together a little bit at the very end. I was worried they wouldn't come together at all. A little bit of coming together. In this chapter, Ingold is looking at the ideas of technology, language, and intelligence. And in some ways, I think that this chapter may have been written for an earlier time in academia, fighting against some people who may have gone away a little bit. But I think these ideas are still pretty much around. They may even be, they may be even more entrenched in some areas than they were back then. They haven't gone away, let's say. So Ingold says that these concepts are grounded in a general claim to the supremacy of human reason, a claim that is perhaps the defining feature of the discourse of modernity. Thus, intelligence is the faculty of reason, language is its vehicle, and technology the means by which a rational understanding of the external world is turned to account for human benefit. I think those ideas are still with us. Perhaps it strikes me reading them now that they've been under increasing challenge by the fact that we do not seem to be turning the world to human benefit through the use of technology these days. I mean, kind of. But we seem to be, more and more people are questioning the idea of whether humans have been that smart about how we have used technology in the world. Perhaps more and more human beings are questioning whether the human use of language on sites like Twitter has been that smart either. But all the same, these three ideas still hold sway in the sense that these are things that we are supposed to achieve and master. So, Gabe, what does Ingold want us to tell us in this chapter?
That you can't just like have all the information to be able to do something. You need to put it into practice.
Yeah, he's definitely going into ideas of practice. He first makes what he calls a radically alternative claim, which may even be too harsh for us, namely that there is no such thing as technology or language or intelligence. Whoa, at least in pre-modern or non-Western societies. By that, I do not for one moment mean to suggest that people in such societies do not make common use of tools, that they do not engage with one another in the verbal idioms of speech, or that these and other activities do not represent creative ways of coping in the world. Maybe he should have just stopped with there is no such thing as technology or language or intelligence, and then put out his alternative proposal, which is that of craftsmanship is what he says, but we're going to say craft because too much man in there, song and imagination, that we could reconceptualize or reimagine the course of human life as, again, along these lines of the practical activities of craft, song, and imagination. I'm not always sure what to make of this chapter. Sometimes I like it. Sometimes I think it's a bit of a letdown. Willa, you said you liked it.
I mean, I didn't quite understand the whole thing about the song and saying it's like talking or whatever. But I thought it was good because I just restated a lot.
Certainly this chapter does pull in things from other chapters, but oftentimes does talk about them in a more everyday sense and giving us some examples that are perhaps more understandable, like song, although song might be difficult. Let's start with song though. Ingold says on page 408 that we usually think of a song as a coming together of words and music. So you have words on one register, the linguistic meaning register. When you have music on a different register, we can write that out as well. But he says that the idea of this coming together presupposes their original separation. To produce a song, it seems we have to combine two things that are initially distinct, music and language. But on what grounds do we assume this distinction? Could we not equally well put the argument in reverse and suggest that music and language are the products of a movement of analytic decomposition of what was once an indivisible expressive totality, namely song? To speak is to sing. And then there's that wonderful example of the Umeda in Papua New Guinea on page 413, a people whose speech has retained its expressive song-like quality. All speaking is inherently poetic. Alfred Gell writes, "What need of poets then? You don't need poets if your speech is inherently poetic." So I think, I find it fascinating, the idea that instead of thinking about a song as the coming together of words and music, that in fact, perhaps there was an original unity there which we have separated out, and that speaking is, as Ingold puts it, in a sense to sing. He deals with this in a way by talking about the linguists versus the so-called naive speakers. So the linguists are the people who study language and get all kinds of words associated with language. They have a lot of complicated things to say. I think Rosa is probably on Ingold's side, although he definitely has some complex words in his book. But Ingold talks to us about on page 409 that, these words, linguists are fond of reminding us that one sound is as good as another. So, and then he says the linguist, to clinch the argument, the linguist points to the sheer diversity of natural languages, to the fact that the different words, say, for dog in these different languages may bear not the slightest resemblance to one another, nor indeed to the real world animal of that name. I think I've done this for you in cultural anthropology. I just did it in intro, although nobody got the answer right on the exam. I put up the dog and a perro and a shin and a hund, and we talked about how these are arbitrary signifiers. They have nothing to do with each other or with the animal in question. Ingold here says it's time for us, the naive speakers, to put the linguists in their place, because these conventions have been, the words gather their meanings, not that they're somehow poetic or that they are automatically that, but they have a sort of condensed history, and that we really can't understand words and what people are trying to do with words unless we include expressiveness and emotion and what people are trying to do with these words. So if you look at page 411, there's some I love these examples. So the linguist says that the message, "the house is on fire," can, if need be, conveyed with no more excitement than the information that Paris is a city in France. house is on fire. Paris is a city in France. There you go. This may be so, yet in practice, anyone who says the house is on fire does so in a context and a tone of voice that may vary from a level monotone to a high-pitched shout. The house is on fire. In the context of utterance, the former tone is as expressive of indifference as is the latter of urgency or anguish, and each is liable to evoke a quite different response on the part of the audience, from a detached contemplation of the conflagration, the house is on fire, to a rush to evacuate the building, the house is on fire. How then can these possibly be regarded as alternative renderings of the same proposition? And so, it's, well, we may as well go further since we've been talking about the writing part. Only by abstracting the verbal phrase from its context, by treating it as though, like words printed as they appear here on paper, it had a separate existence of its own. In reality, we're trying to do something with your speech. It's an intentional act. And it launches my intentions into the world. Do you get it? Do you fucking get it? See, I made you smile. It launched intentions into the world. Same words. Wouldn't have even had to change in tonality. In short, whether I speak, swear, shout, cry, or sing, I do so with feeling. But feeling is a mode of active and responsive engagement in the world. We feel each other's presence in verbal discourse as the craftsman feels with his tools the material on which she works. Crazy. Feel each other's presence in the world through speech. I wondered if I was going to use that line. Kind of worked though. Got a smile. I want to cross this back over to some Rosa here and the idea of school kids. Ingold on page 410 talks about how people learn how to speak Where are those kids who have to learn how to write? Gosh. Oh no, I'm on 412 in gold. So Ingold here talks about how the idea of language is relatively recent. We talked about that in the last class. Has had a profound impact on our activities. So we've institutionalized language, like people are still learning how to speak, but we've institutionalized language in systems of education. Children not only learn to speak, as they have always and everywhere done through immersion in an environment of vocally accomplished caregivers, they also receive formal schooling in the principles of language. And they have a bunch of grammarians and dictionary makers. Above all, they are taught to write. And for Ingold, this teaching people how to write produces something that is not, or at least the way writing is taught in schools, produces something that is not exactly, it turns speech into an alternative medium. Now in Rosa's work, there's sort of an interesting parallel to this, and Rosa is in part drawing upon the work of another linguistic anthropologist, Shirley Bryce Heath, who talks about how children come into school from different literacy practices, and those get devalued in school in different ways in the school setting. And for Rosa, it's quite interesting. I mean, for one thing, he says that he's drawing on Heath's work in the sense that there's a devaluing of their literacy practices, but it's even more than that. It's often a criminalization of their literacy practices, and it can be, as Rosa puts it, a matter of life and death. But what he says here is that there's this idea in the school that they're not writing. And then as he says here, they're like writing and they're covertly composing text messages on their cell phones and doing all these things. And as he says on page 186, whether by way of notes, tags, rap lyrics, text messages, MySpace, or Facebook, the same students who teachers claimed would not write seem to be writing all the time. So in fact, there's a lot of writing going on. And Rosa is eventually trying to say that we should work our way out of these stereotypes of the school kid and the street kid, and that those kinds of dichotomies and binaries need to be dissolved because they are actually being put right next to each other. There's a pretty incredible example of Jose's notebook, which has his the way that he's using non-standardized spellings on one hand and juxtaposed with his neatly written schedule on the front of his binder, that in some ways the students are writing a great deal, but those are devalued or even often criminalized instead of being used, you might say, or being taken into account. So a lot of good stuff here on song literacy and writing. Ingold also turns back to something we looked at in a previous chapter. This portrait of the harvesters. Gabe didn't like. I now know why Gabe doesn't like these harvesters. So on page 416, Ingold says that the harvester at work, swinging his scythe in a constant rhythmic dance-like movement and singing as he does so. That, to my mind, is the archetypal situation of human tool use, not the puzzle-solving scenarios beloved of cognitive psychologists. So Ingold is trying to tell us that the classic situation of human tool use is someone singing, maybe doing even a little dancing, rhythmic motion as they're harvesting the wheat here. Gabe, what were you doing instead of this when you were growing up?
I was playing video games and writing myself like guides on what to do.
You're doing the video game thing. Did you ever have to swing a scythe and like kill a zombie or something like that?
I guess, yeah.
There you go. But you said that it didn't help to write all the things out. Or I mean, it helped to have writing was important, but what you needed to do was, what do you need to do to be able to play the game?
You needed to develop a sort of like, it's called, I think it's like, is game sense only like specific to video games? Have you heard that term before?
Game sense?
Yeah.
I have not, but that doesn't mean that I know anything about it.
But game sense is just like a feeling, like a general feeling of like what you should be doing at a specific moment, and like a feeling of like what your opponent will be doing at any given moment. And it's like, it's hard, as Ingold said, it's impossible to write all that down. You just have to feel it out. And like the more you play, the more that sense develops, and like the better your outcome will be.
The feeling your way through the game, which is perhaps not the way that people were thinking about these games when they were first designed. I think they were first designed as puzzle solving scenarios, but now it's more like a game. It's more like a, you know, I do think it's more like a basketball or something. I mean, maybe that, I don't know if it comes, if that term is also used in sports, being able to, but I'm thinking about flow, getting that flow and feeling for what's going on. Certainly, well, Ingold's example is the cello, but I mean, have you played musical instruments? Yeah.
Played violin.
Violin.
Like 4 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, diving in, feeling, try to get the feel for things. Yeah. So this was it's an interesting recap back to there, yeah.
That's a really dumb question. Why did he put an apostrophe for the word cello?
Why did he do it?
I
Yeah.
saw that, I was like, is that a typo? I was so happy. I was like, did I find an Ingold typo?
Yeah, that was curious. I actually think it's an English schism. So it turns out Ingold is actually a fairly accomplished cellist, at least for an anthropologist. He's pretty good at it. So I don't think he typoed. You know what it is?
Yeah, it's because the official name for a cello is a violoncello.
Yeah, the official name for that. And so, yes, I guess if you're writing in UK English, you have to put that little apostrophe in, maybe just because you're being obnoxious and you're saying, I know the real word for this. I mean, I certainly wouldn't do it. My son plays cello pretty well did so, but yeah, it was curious to see that. The violoncello, yeah, that's the official title. Cello is so hard. It's hard to play these things. So you have to get a feel for things. I was struck here. I don't know why, but I started looking for the tagging art that Rosa describes in the writing, and I stumbled upon this website which was documenting a little while ago, so probably would have to be updated, the 25 greatest Chicago graffiti writers. And there's a lot of literacy writing stuff going on, and you know, the whole idea as Rosa said, of spreading your name around and the fame of this, it was pretty fascinating, in fact, to read about this a little bit. It's pretty this, I guess, this is by a graffiti artist named Fact. The caption of this said, Fact has been involved in the graffiti scene since his very early childhood. He has managed to stay up while fighting Chicago's extremely effective buff system. In fact, is the most consistently active all-city bomber in Chicago in the 2000s. So this is a pretty interesting idea of having this fame, of trying to spread fame and contrast it with the idea of being in a gang. And so I started to think about the archetypal artist being someone with a spray can, singing as they graffitied onto here, and probably wouldn't write cello with an apostrophe. Maybe they would, don't know. In the very last section, Ingold seeks to draw our attention to the idea of imagination in comparison with the idea of intelligence. And we could spend some time on this in terms of how we might try to, we spent a long time in anthropology and in other places trying to prove or trying to speak out against the idea that some people are less or more intelligent than others, and that those intelligences can be sorted out by social class or race. And we keep running up against these stereotypes. And I sometimes do wonder if we could do better, if we could somehow reconceive intelligence in terms of imagination in what Ingold sort of hints at here. And so he ends the book, and I, like I said, I sometimes I think this is a little bit of a letdown end to the book, but other times I'm more convinced by its beauty and possibility. Of all the products of the human imagination, so Ingold has told us that humans are uniquely good at imagining things and being able to imagine different possibilities as they are living. Of all the products of the human imagination, perhaps the most decisive and far-reaching has been the idea that there exists such a thing as an intelligence. So that's kind of a bold claim. Of all the products of the human imagination, the most decisive and far-reaching is the idea that there exists such a thing as an intelligence installed in the heads of each and every one of us, and that is ultimately responsible for our activities. Not sure. Is this the most decisive and far-reaching idea? It's a pretty big deal. The idea that people can be sorted out. I mean, it certainly structures our idea of schooling and who belongs where and what kinds of, it structures people who believe that certain people should get social services and certain people should not, or structures our idea of how people acquire wealth, even if it's completely obvious that most people just inherit their wealth. But certainly this is an interesting reconceptualization of all the products of the human imagination. Most decisive and far-reaching has been the idea there exists such a thing as an intelligence. Ever since reading this book, I've searched for various Ingold books to follow up on, and he does good things in all of them. I've never found something that is kind of as compact or incisive to me as the essays in the perception of the environment. But he's just come out with another set of his third and final set of essays, he says, called Imagining for Real, which maybe that's the, maybe that's where he develops this imagining thing more. I was trying to look at this book and see what the contents were. I have a very perverse idea that I might assign this to cultural anthropology next semester, make them read 23 essays. They might kill me though, or it might kill me. I thought it might be good to juxtapose that with Rosa's ending, which is also about reimagining and imagining, curiously using the same reimagining title or word. There it is, the reimagining of these borders. That worlds beyond these borders are not just possible, but in fact already in existence and waiting to be recognized as such. So that the reimagining is possible, going on, and just needs to be recognized, needs to be seen. They go together, I think, here at the end a little bit. So I don't know, I think, I'm not exactly sure why this song has been stuck in my mind as a way to illustrate, well, maybe not illustrate Ingold's claim, but as a way to think through. So this song is called Nothing But Flowers by the Talking Heads. It was recorded originally in 1988. There's also a really great version of this song I've discovered by Caetano Veloso, the incredible Brazilian vocalist, who in some ways does these really vocally interesting things with the song and makes it his own in a way that I don't, the Talking Heads are, it's even better because he sort of feels the vocals in a way that I don't even think the Talking Heads do. But the thing and then I watched this, I finally watched the original and official video of this song, and it just has this really wonderful combination of the lyrics with textuality and font. But it kind of speaks, I think it speaks to this idea, which, you know, you have this whole world in Ingold where he seems to be wanting to go back and like swing scythes around and eat berries and stuff. And and here, you know, the Talking Heads are probably, David Byrne is talking about that in a way that it's kind of happened, but he's also longing for, and you know, we don't know how much of this is just facetious, he's also longing for the liberatory potential of highways and Dairy Queens and 7-Elevens. I better just play it before I spoil it for you.